With the rise of new genetic engineering technologies in the past decade, few would think to look to popular media to help us understand the effects of technology on society. However, media is an instrumental tool in helping us understand the fears individuals hold regarding technology and can serve as a looking glass into the future without ethical or moral consideration. Genetic engineering is often seen in pop culture and movies today. Our first reference to genetic engineering in pop culture starts with the movie Gattaca. In the 1997 film Gattaca, a society that uses reproductive technology genetically engineers their humans. Your DNA determines your social class. It tells the story of a man who was born without this genetic engineering technology and therefore faces extreme genetic prejudice. In order to get his dream job and thrive in society, he pretends to have genetically engineered DNA. In the movie, they often jokingly use the term degenerate. In relation to Gattaca, there has been a lot of connection to the field of eugenics. This is the philosophy that only people with desirable traits should reproduce. It advocates for genetic improvement of the human species through selective reproduction. Genetic engineering is not just limited to pop culture. It is seen in many studies today. A Chinese researcher, He Jiankui, stunned the world when he claimed he engineered the world's first genetically edited babies. Using CRISPR, he modified the CCR5 gene in two embryos and implanted them into the mother. He had specifically chosen the CCR5 gene because it codes for a protein HIV used to affect immune cells. His work was especially condemned because of its introduction to the possibility of designer babies. Featured in the movie Gattaca, designer babies are genetically engineered in vitro for certain traits, such as lower disease risk, gender, or even aestheticism like eye or hair color. With a world of unknown risks in tampering with an embryo, the field continues to be a controversial discussion in biomedical ethics. Our second film is a very famous one, Jurassic Park. To go from a tiny drop of preserved blood to full-on dinosaur, geneticists in the 1993 movie Jurassic Park, which was based on Michael Crichton's 1990 novel, were able to take strands of multi-million-year-old dino DNA and use them to clone dinosaurs. Filling in the damaged areas of DNA with frog DNA, scientists sequenced whole dinosaur genomes. Though the filmmakers took some creative liberties with some details, for example, creating T-Rex with poor vision or using dinosaurs from the Cretaceous period, all of Crichton's work was based on real peer-reviewed research. Though we don't see massive dinosaurs roaming Earth today, modern technology allows scientists to explore the real possibilities of de-extinction. A Harvard team led by Professor George Church excited about the possibilities of bringing a woolly mammoth back from extinction. We interviewed the Church Lab to gain some insight on their work.
My name's Oliver. I'm a second year graduate student in the Church Lab. The whole lab can sort of broadly be sort of explained as being focused around reading and writing technologies for DNA. Some projects that are worked on in the lab is there are efforts for de-extinction to try and de-extinctify the woolly mammoth by recovering, again, using sequencing to recover the original genome. And then, maybe one day using genome modification or writing to produce some sort of transgenic or very close to what would be an actual woolly mammoth. Currently, where that project is that for more immediate impact, they've focused on identifying genes regulating cold resistance in mammoths and actually trying to apply and graft those genes onto like modern day like Asian elephants, which are having a lot of trouble regulating to some of the colder temperatures in the sort of rapidly changing climate situation that exists in their natural habitat. And they're working with really cool people in Asia and Africa. So that's like a really interesting example of a project with like a really big vision, but also some near-term impact to contribute to species conservation efforts. As to whether or not, a woolly mammoth could or should be brought back, especially considering that the native tundra, doesn't exist anymore, I think that's an interesting ethical or philosophical discussion that, some people in the lab have had. But I do think that, in general, people culturally identify with, that the label that project sort of sends, and all really are, excited about the prospect that one day, using biology, maybe we can actually reintroduce, extinct species that have, unfortunately died off due to overhunting or, overgaming or climate change. So I think that like having more biodiversity, especially when that particular animal used to occupy like a very essential niche of that ecosystem, I think that's like almost always good. Now, whether or not so therefore on the general idea of de-extinction, I think like that's sort of how I would defend that to someone who maybe doesn't necessarily think that that's correct, or like maybe they went extinct for a reason, right? And that may be true for some classes of animals, right? Like maybe we don't need to resurrect like like a triceratops, right? Because like what good would it do, right? For the woolly mammoth, because they lived on the frozen tundra and like most of that is pretty much gone, there's like no natural habitat for them left. There is an ethical discussion around, if you were able to do it with the woolly mammoth, should you do it? Because there's nowhere left for them to live. So that's a valid question. But I think more so, specific animals, maybe you can have certain arguments around because they don't have a habitat anymore, or because like it just doesn't make sense to try and de-extinctify a dinosaur. But I think generally, if you look at especially recently extinct species, like within the last 5 years, you were to say like if you could have a technology that could bring all those species back, I think that would be something that would be very valuable to preserving the planet. I think a lot of the time people actually draw inspiration for new science from sort of creative ideas that have already been proposed in science fiction. So I do think that I don't think that the movies have made us desensitized or like alarmist or anything like that. I actually think that like there are still some really interesting concepts that can be mined, and I think often the future that people portray in sci-fi can be very accurate to what the actual future is 50 years after that particular piece of media is created. So I think that's an interesting place for scientists to draw inspiration from.
Next up is the Marvel hit Spider-Man, in which the main character, Peter Parker, is bitten by a genetically engineered spider. In this movie, scientists combined synthesized RNA from 3 spider webs to create 15 genetically modified spiders with superior web building ability and jumping strength. Once bitten by a genetically modified spider let loose into a museum by scientists, Peter Parker has his life changed forever. According to Marvel, the spider acts like a common virus and exchanges genetic information with Peter's cells, which instantly and irreversibly changes his genetic code. This kind of irreversible change that's a byproduct of scientific experimentation is more than just fiction. It's a true fear. Genes, the core of our human existence, are a part of our identity. And if scientists can control our genes, can they control us? But at the same time, these genetic changes create a superhero. Peter, now part human, part spider, gains skills no human has ever enjoyed. Maybe he can't fly, but spinning webs across Queens is pretty close. We can see here that controversies surrounding genetic engineering exist everywhere, and is challenging to resolve even at the level of entertainment. Next up is A Brave New World, a novel published by Aldous Huxley in 1932. Huxley's work, although published almost a century ago, deals with themes surrounding genetic engineering, stratification of society, and ignorance that are still relevant. In the wake of technological optimism following World War I, Brave New World was criticized harshly for being anti-science. The present-day outlook, however, is much more favorable, with critics praising Huxley for being before his time, and themes for the book for continuing relevant almost a century later. In terms of genetic engineering, perhaps the most memorable scene is the opening scene in which the protagonist, Bernard Marx, is seen touring a hatchery. Although most think of a hatchery as a place to raise poultry, the central London Hatchery and Conditioning Centre has a much more sinister purpose. In this hatchery, human embryos are grown and children are conditioned for optimum success in society, since even before birth, the lives of these individuals are decided. With the development of more advanced genetic engineering technologies such as CRISPR, the themes of social stratification due to science explored in A Brave New World have reemerged. As genetic engineering is seen in many studies and pop culture today, this leads to the question, have movies desensitized us to genetic engineering, or has it just opened our doors? Is it fiction, or can it be real? Thank you so much for watching, and please stay tuned for the next video.